Welcome to the Crystal Fideli podcast. I am your host, Crystal Fideli. I am a social researcher and policy analyst, speaker, consultant, and an award-winning nonprofit founder and executive director. And all of my work focuses on helping us to understand coercive control, helping organizations to understand coercive control so they can respond better, and helping individuals understand coercive control so they can navigate the systems that they need to navigate better. And here on the Crystal Fideli podcast at large, we examine when institutional norms and practices diverge from what the research calls an evidence-based approach, being based on science, research, the law, etc., and instead reverts into using what the research calls a practice-based approach based on tradition and opinion, and how it causes an immense amount of harm to very vulnerable and marginalized people. And that leads me into introducing you to a special series we are doing here on the Crystal Fideli podcast called When Coercive Control Turns Financial, the Family Court Response and the Cascading Consequences. We see in the research and in practice time and time again when a woman attempts to set boundaries on the coercive control that she is experiencing, how the coercive control does not stop, because that's not how it works. Coercive control does not stop when a woman sets boundaries. It just switches forms and it intensifies until a person in power or an institution steps in and stops it. So she attempts to set boundaries, and most often it switches to financial. And we examine the family court's response and how that leads to so many cascading consequences. So, welcome to the series.
All right, so let's get right into it. So, our guests today, we are protecting their identity. So, we are keeping their camera off. So let's get right into it. So for the first section, I want to focus on what your experience was like inside the relationship. So a lot of people think that domestic abuse is an isolated physical incident model, something that happens and then stops. But what we see both in research and in lived experience, my fellow practitioners and I, what we see in our practice every day is that domestic abuse is often not about individual incidents and it's not necessarily physical. It's a pattern over time where one person is trying to maintain power and control over their target, and it can show up in different ways. So I want to start by understanding what that looked like in your experience. So while you were in the relationship, would you mind just sharing how you experienced abuse, like inside the relationship? Was it psychological, which I would say encompasses emotional and mental abuse? Was it physical? Was it sexual, or in any other way?
So the abuse I experienced during the relationship, I mean, it kind of encompassed all of those things you just mentioned. So there was physical abuse. At times, it wasn't something that happened necessarily frequently, but when it did happen, it was pretty severe. I mean, to me, anyways, it wasn't, I didn't have black eyes, I wasn't bleeding, but there were times that, it did get pretty intense. Um, the psychological part would be probably more if I wanted to communicate something, it was a lot of stonewalling. If I did not do something that they wanted me to do, or I didn't think the way they wanted to think, or if I called out something they did not want to address, they would shut me out and not speak to me for days. So that happened very frequently. I learned very quickly to just kind of keep my thoughts and opinions to myself and don't share them. And living like that for years is something that becomes kind of its own prison in itself. It's really hard to explain, but and then there was times that there were sexual abuse, actually from the very beginning of the relationship. If I There was one time in particular where I just refused sexual relations, and he physically held me down and did what he wanted to do. It didn't matter. I was screaming and kicking and trying to get him off me. I couldn't, and he did what he wanted to do. And at that point, it's like I didn't tell anybody. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. Of course, I was really young. I was 16 at the time because I was 16 when I got married. And
Wow.
Yeah. And
How old was
so
he?
he was 19 or 20 at the time. So
Here in Jersey, that's not even allowed in New Jersey. You have to be 18, I believe.
yeah, so in Oklahoma, it's allowed. Actually, what's interesting is they just had an article come out today on the news that they are trying to make it illegal to, because I was married not because I was pregnant or anything like that. I just came from kind of a religious background where um, my parents knew that I had had intercourse, and they thought the solution was best if I were to marry this person, um, opposed to not marrying them. So that was the argument actually presented recently because they're trying to pass a law in Oklahoma where parents cannot consent for children to get married before the age of 18. And there were some arguments made where people feel that this shouldn't pass because um, people that are 16 and 17 should be allowed to get married. Um, so yeah, I mean, hopefully it does pass. I wish I could actually go and speak and maybe shed some more light on that, because to this very day, that decision that my parents made for me impacts me greatly. And I wish I could have just been given a couple more years for my brain to develop just a little bit more. And because I am religious and because I have been brought up in such a conservative home, once I was married at the age of 16 and all this abuse began to happen, I was so trapped because I did feel like divorce was wrong and I had to do anything I could to overcome, and that divorce was not an acceptable option. So I thought I could, I guess, like absorb all this abuse and eventually it would be okay if I were the, Proverbs 31 wife and did all these things that, um, and just prayed about it and was, a good wife and mother, that one day my husband would stop abusing me and see the value in me. That did not happen. And come to find out, that's not really how God wanted me to ever live. I was just taught that by religion. So,
Yeah, I like that
uh,
you're making that distinction between religion and, Jesus, because I have found in my life that it's quite, in fact, the opposite. And Jesus was actually very much outspoken against the religious leaders of his day. And I just think that if Jesus, I mean, obviously Jesus lives in us within the Holy Spirit, right? But like, if Jesus was like walking the earth as a man today, yeah, I just wonder if he would have a lot to say to the current religious leaders that teach things that kept you, bound for years. Um, so yeah, so I mean, that probably just added like a whole new level to your story is the religious sort of teachings that was playing in the background. But well anyway, okay. So wow. So you experienced psychological abuse. I mean, stonewalling is definitely psychological, and it's interesting because you were saying that if you didn't even think the way that he wanted you to think, right? That you would be stonewalled for days. So that's extremely coercive. Um, the stonewalling is coercive because it's not like an outward action. It's a very overt, like withheld action, but that still causes so much pain to you. And then it's interesting because it wasn't necessarily like an outward action of yours. It was even how you thought. Um, would you feel comfortable like giving an example of that or no?
of like how I thought or felt when they
Yeah.
still.
Like what was a way you thought that wasn't okay with him? And how did you know that it was that specific thought or way of thinking that you had that wasn't okay with him? And like what did he just stonewalled you, I guess, right? But how did you know that? Well, it's because I thought this about this specific thing.
um I'm trying to think of like a good example I could give. And the thing is because we were married for 18 years, and it took me, I didn't I want to clarify, like, I didn't know what stonewalling was during that relationship. I had no clue. I had no clue if this behavior was normal, not normal. I did not know. I just know how it made me feel. And I would just as though I was trapped, right? Like I couldn't express myself. I couldn't be myself. I couldn't have thoughts. I couldn't have opinions. And it made me just feel horrible. But it was like inside of me because on the outside I had to pretend like everything was fine. Um, and it wasn't until after the divorce, whenever I started some really intense therapy, that I learned that this was abusive behavior and that, the term stonewalling, and I was able to kind of identify and connect those things. But I'm trying to think of a specific example throughout the relationship that created the stonewalling. Like, he had a really bad temper. So let me just start with it because that was throughout the entire relationship. It's not as soon as we were married, like actually it started right before we were actually married that I saw it. But he had this terrible temper where he would just blow up in fits of anger. And it would be over things like if the house wasn't clean enough. Um, One time I was making his plate of food and I put sour cream on his potato and he didn't like sour cream. And he
That's
would
all I eat
just
my potatoes with. And whenever I go to the restaurant, I ask for a side of sour cream with my French fries. Sorry.
he would just blow up into a fit of rage. If I put his clothes on the hanger in the closet and I stretched it too far when I put the clothes on there, I mean, he would just blow up in rage. Um, One time specifically, so we had young children and my car had to be really clean all the time. If it got dirty at all, I mean, it would just spark this fit of rage. And so he would blow up in the fits of rage. And I would just kind of be like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Like, oh my gosh, I didn't clean good enough. I didn't do this good enough or whatever. And if after it was over, if I said, you know what, you were wrong for that. You shouldn't have done that. Like, you should not have yelled at me for, like, you shouldn't have done that. It would every time result in me being shut down and not spoken to for days. This happened from the very beginning of the relationship. And if I said, you shouldn't be screaming, cussing me, or calling me names, or, because when he would have those fits of rage, I was called everything imaginable. And I was told that I only had things because of him. Without him, I would have nothing. And this was from the very beginning. And if I stood up to him and showed any type of anger for that, or if I said, you're wrong, you shouldn't be treating me this way, or anything along those lines, I was not going to be spoken to for days. Or he would start a fight with me by, like, blowing up in anger. And then if I was like, you know what, I've had enough, and I would just tell him, he would shut me down and like say I needed to shut up and stop talking. And if I said, no, I'm not going to shut up and stop talking, you shouldn't have done this, and whatever the case was, it was yeah, it was, I mean, it would be my fault that we were having some type of conflict because I tried to address it. So essentially what he was trying to teach me, I see it now. At the time, obviously I had no clue. I just was to accept his behavior and not to say anything about it, not to address it, and keep my thoughts to myself, keep my feelings to myself, because they did not matter.
Wow. Um, it's interesting because if the listeners are seeing I'm wearing the same outfit in two other interviews, it's because I've recorded two other episodes today. And it's just, I literally have my notes and I'm writing here and I have my two other notes, my chicken scratch. And And that's a trend that I'm seeing, a pattern I'm noticing. It's just like your thoughts and feelings don't matter. It's almost like these perpetrators of domestic abuse. It's like I get this picture. I've said this, I think, in every episode today, but it's like they're the king and they're sitting on a throne, like back in the 1500s, right? Is what I picture. And it's like you're a peasant and you're coming in. And I don't view you this way, but it seems like with how these perpetrators of domestic abuse act, this is just like the picture I get from how they're handling the situations. And it's like you're the peasant coming in begging for whatever. And it's like, but they have the final rule, the final say.
Yeah.
Instead of, you all being at like now we're back to the 21st century here in my mind, at a conference table where you both are like sitting across from one another or side by side, like making a decision together, right? It's like that they don't allow for that type of dynamic. Um, yeah, and it just, yeah, your thoughts and feelings don't matter. And I have here in my notes that, you're like an object, dehumanization, devaluing, thinking that the pain that was being caused was like, funny. And from an interview earlier today, she didn't want to have sex with her husband. And so he took her to a mental hospital and had her evaluated. Thank God the mental hospital, I shouldn't have called it that. A hospital where they deliver, that's what she called it, but a hospital where they gave psychiatric service. But thank God they said, you should probably get divorced. Maybe they could have done a little bit more, like called the police or something. I don't know, but at least they did that. And yeah, just like it's just like there's obviously power and control. Like they're the ones who are in charge. You're the subordinate, and they just use you.
Yeah. And that's exactly everything you explained was how I felt the entire 18 years of marriage. I didn't know how to obviously put that into words or understand what was happening for years. But I was an object. I was not a human being to him.
Yeah.
I did not matter. My feelings did not matter. It just, he was above me. I was beneath him in his eyes, and there was nothing I was ever going to do that was going to make me worth any value. It didn't matter.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Um, and I'm noticing this pattern where he had rage. You protested against that as you should have, saying, like, you can't do this to me. You can't speak to me that way. I disagree with you. Whatever, however you protested. And then he followed up by stonewalling.
Yes. And then during the stonewalling, when he was not speaking to me or talking to me or acting like I existed, if I were to say anything at all, I mean, I couldn't. I was not allowed. I couldn't speak.
Now, when you say you couldn't speak, you weren't allowed. I mean, what do you mean? Like,
It would
I mean,
throw him into a fit of rage if I did. So, like, I can remember this one specific time. He was stonewalling me, and he had been for days. And he was laying in our bed, and I went, and I was laying in our bed next to him, and I think I was reading something, and I tried talking to him, and he didn't want me to talk to him, so he told me to shut up.
wow,
Um,
it's
and I
very
said,
mature.
you know what? You can't tell me to shut up. I can talk to myself if I want to. So I just started talking to myself. Like just because I was so frustrated and so angry with like how he was shutting me out and telling me I could not speak because it happened all the time. And I mean, he just reached over and punched me. Like, I told you to shut up. Like, he punched me in the leg, but he punched me. And it was just like, but there was zero playfulness in it. It was like, I told you to shut up and you're not going to keep talking to yourself. Like, you're going to shut up. You're not allowed to speak. And that was, I mean, that just kind of summed up our relationship. That's just how, that's how it was. Like, and if I, it's not like I was, and that's the thing about it. It's not like I mean, I did end up being submissive through a lot of things I never should have. But whenever I mean, I can stand up for myself like when I need to, but it was like there was so much confusion in my head throughout that relationship of what's right and what's wrong, what's normal, what's not normal, you know. And then sometimes he would do good or he would seemingly be good. There were certain things he did that was good. So it was like in my mind, like, you know, is this abuse? Is this not abuse? Like, you know, have I caused it from, you know, trying to stand up to myself, like for myself? Like it was just, there was so much confusion throughout the entire thing. Um, and I didn't understand the mind battle, the kind of mind emotional control that was happening that entire time. Like I didn't understand it.
Wow. So now when you said that there was rage and then protest and stonewalling, so the rage included physical violence against you or objects?
Uh, yeah, both. I mean, he would always throw and break things all the time
Yeah.
during those fits of rage. And then sometimes it would be physical to me. I mean, the worst it ever got is he did try to strangle me when I was like 6 or 7 months pregnant. As he banged my head in the wall because the house was a mess and he didn't like that the house was a mess. He was very, very particular about things being clean and in order and, you know, the car, the house. And if they weren't, it just threw him into complete rage. And we had small children and that was, you know,
Did he
very
ever
difficult.
clean?
No, I mean, towards the end of the marriage, I think he started, he would occasionally, if he was in the right mood, but not, but I mean, to him, cleaning and my, you know, it was like totally like he might put some dishes in the dishwasher on occasion. But as far as like the entire time we were married, I don't ever have any memory of him doing any laundry. He never scrubbed a toilet. He never cleaned floors. So he never did anything like that at all. But on occasion, he would like do a couple of dishes here and there towards the end of our relationship. That was kind of the
Interesting.
extent of it. But
I'm just noticing that he had a very strong opinion, but he didn't really, you know, actually clean, but he had very strong opinions about things being clean.
yeah,
I guess he thought that was your job.
yeah.
Okay, so there was definitely psychological abuse, there was definitely physical abuse against you and objects. There was definitely sexual abuse. I'm so sorry. Okay, so yeah, and then we identified the patterns that like you were definitely an object, you know, that your thoughts and feelings did not matter. You know, he was the one in charge. He dictated things. Um, and so you stood up and you protested and were like, that I can do this if I want. Like, you know, this doesn't work for me. Now let me ask you this. The relationship ending, um, was it kind of bit by bit? Did you start to set more and more boundaries, or was it just like an abrupt cutoff?
I started to set more and more boundaries, is really what happened. But I had, so what kind of changed the dynamics, honestly, in our relationship was when my two oldest became teenagers. The abuse that he had generally taken out on me, he kind of flipped and started taking it out on them. And I was constantly like kind of in protection mode, getting in between him and the kids, trying to protect the kids. Um, and there was a lot of chaos surrounding that in particular. And I had become so mentally depleted at this point that I really just kind of became a shell of myself. I became, I think, really depressed, maybe. And I was having a hard time even battling and having the desire to want to fix or change things. I'm sorry, hold on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. The dogs.
It's okay.
So I had started trying to think of ways that I could divorce him in a way that wouldn't create like a bunch of chaos. And I had went to him actually and said, like, I'm done. I want a divorce. This is just too hard. And he had convinced me to stay. And keep in mind, at this point, we had been married at like 16, 17 years. And he was like, I want to make this work. He kind of convinced me to stay or whatever. I was like, okay, I can do this. I can figure this out. I can do this if he'll get better. But he didn't. The abuse towards the children got worse, especially my teenage daughter at the time. Like how old was she? She was 13. Like, I mean, I'm talking, he went after her a couple of times and I had to pull him off. Like, he was in her face screaming, like, derogatory terms and just like threatening to hit her. And, and it was awful. And I didn't know, like, I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, my daughter cannot think that this is acceptable. So within that year, things got really rocky again. Like, and it was all about putting up boundaries. Like, but I just couldn't, I just couldn't handle him anymore. Like, I was just over it. I was like, I don't care what he does or threat. Like, I don't care. And then all in that same time, I found out about like his third affair, I think. The one that, like, it was like the third time. So there was a lot going on at that time. And so finally we just were like, we got into a really bad argument. He left the house and I stayed up all night long, did not sleep that night. And I went and I filed for divorce. I scraped up, this retainer fee, and I went and sat in front of the attorney and I was like, and it was a real weird feeling because I don't know how to explain it. It was like, I had to go file for that divorce. If I didn't file for that divorce, I was afraid I was going to stay trapped. And I had just started counseling, literally just started counseling. And this counselor had brought a couple of really important things kind of to my attention, that resonated with me. And I was like, I know, like, I have to file for this divorce no matter what. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know how it was all going to play out, but like, I had to do it. And I did. I just did. I just followed through. It was the hardest thing, but I just did. And then everything just kind of spiraled after that. Like, they went and served him with papers. The attorney told me all the things I needed to do. That attorney actually told me, and which this is something tricky in family court, because I told the attorney everything I had been dealing with. And he said, I will not represent you if you do not go and file a protective order. You will go file a protective order, or I will not represent you. And I did exactly
what that's interesting use of coercion.
Right. So it's a really confusing thing, because I feel like my experience now in family court for the last 11, 12 years is that there's a lot of creating a bunch of issues where you shouldn't within the family that harm children. And I think false protective orders is one of them, without a doubt. Now, looking back at it, based off what I told him, I could understand maybe, but it's still a really difficult thing. So of course I didn't even know what I was doing. I was kind of in a daze at that time. I was just doing what I was told. He said, do it. I didn't want to do it. I told him I didn't want to do it. And he said, well, if you don't do it, basically I'm not going to represent you.
But that's coercion. Like, I think it was a good move. I do. And at the same time, that's coercion right there, because it should be your decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I would have never, I mean, and maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know, based on the situation, but I feel like everything went real extreme real fast. which was fine. I needed to get away from him. I think it took something extreme for me to divorce him, to be quite frank, because I put up with so much and I was such a doormat. And it was like, it took something extreme, but the kicker was like, it hurt the children.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I wish I would have had someone there. I didn't really have anybody to help me guide me through it in a healthy way. I was going to counseling. The counselor was helping, to some, I mean, actually a lot, looking back on it, just her helping me think about things because my gauge was so off of what was healthy and what wasn't healthy. But if I could have went through this divorce process in a way where somebody was like, this is how we need to deal with this for the children, to protect the children more, I would have really appreciated that.
Like survivor, or rather individuals with lived experience having better education on the system so they can make informed decisions that they felt good about, rather than your attorney saying, well, you do this, and if you don't, I'm not going to represent you. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, because I didn't realize how much, uh, just filing the protective order, I mean, it didn't really serve its purpose because, to be quite frank, honestly, those things are not really, knowing what I know now, like it just added fuel to the fire. And could I have gotten through that with the divorce without so much fuel on fire, so to speak? My children would not have been as harmed as what they did because, going through the divorce and everything that took place and all of that, there's just been so much harm done to the children. And that's what I wish I could go back and change. Or if someone was in my shoes doing this, there's so much that I could help coach them through. Like, because you're an emotional nutcase anyway, especially if you're leaving years of divorce, and having a healthy gauge and knowing how to think straight and not being in fight or flight, and having your brain like function from a way that, from a standpoint where you're not just reacting. All those things are really hard and overwhelming when you're going through that. But then when you're trying to raise children on top of that and you're trying to help them through this really difficult time, like it's just a recipe for disaster. And there's really zero thought or help, surrounding situations with people in that situation.
You make
If
a
that makes
really, no, you make a really great point, and that's like the gap that I personally saw as a professional, is that okay, we have domestic violence organizations, and typically they provide support groups, or at least here in New Jersey they provide counseling or maybe therapy, and that's all well and good, right? And we need that. And then we have maybe like legal aid or just your private attorneys, and they provide representation, right? Um, but what I saw the gap in that, I don't see an entity or professionals sort of either bridging the two, or even like marrying the two of, let's help you walk through this legal process, but in a very sort of trauma informed, like therapeutic way and empowered way, where we understand and we see that this is so traumatizing, going through family court, and going through, especially going through family court as an individual with children, lived experience with domestic abuse, right? And and sort of like educating you on the process and the system. I don't see the legal field doing that. And obviously, therapists at a domestic violence agency aren't going to do that because that's not their training. That's not their expertise. But at the same time, it's also not the attorney's expertise, because attorneys, I always say, they are trained in your legal rights, statutory law, case law, right? Statutory law is obviously the statutory law. Case law is obviously the statutory law applied to a very specific set of facts. And then how did the court decide? And boom, there's our precedence for if we have this specific set of facts and we're applying this, statutory law, this is the precedence for how we handle these types of matters, right? And then obviously to get from your rights violated to your rights restored, which is the statutory and the case law, procedure is the vehicle to get there. And so they're very trained in the procedure, which is the rules of court. And so, but they're not trained in, okay, what is the individual lived experience like experiencing this all as, and how do they need to be communicated to in a trauma-informed way? That's just not their training. But then the therapists and the domestic violence agencies, they're trained in that for the most part. But they don't have knowledge of family court. They're just like, most of them will say, yeah, court. Ugh, that's a scary one. And it's like, and then survivors are left to navigate the family court system with no one, again, explaining the system to them in a trauma-informed way. And then also, teaching them the skill set of how to document and to document properly and to compile your evidence properly, which can be, in my experience and in the people I work with experience, the most emotionally like regulating and edifying thing, right? So teaching them the system, teaching them the skill set, and helping them develop the capacity to document. And then, also creating their structured, future, phased, reasonable and responsible, phased financial transition plan, right? And then also, teaching them like how to communicate with the family court system, the other side, the opposing party, even their attorney, the judge, the court, third party, court appointed, whoever's, right? And so you bring up a really good point, and that's the gap that I saw. And so that's part of what my work seeks to fill. But is that kind of what you're saying that you wish you had back then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a huge gap there because before I experienced this, I mean, obviously I had no experience in family court. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about courts in general, um, or legal processes, or, I mean, I just was not a legal person. I never worked in that field. I had never personally experienced it. So through this, like the first time I sat in front of my attorney and he said, you're going to do this, this, and this. And,
Yeah.
and I was just in a daze, and I'm just trying to survive in that moment. Like I'm just doing what he was telling me to do. But I had no clue what I was in for. I had no clue how anything worked. And I was so frustrated, with the system and attorneys and the expense of it all.
And that's what they do. They tell you what to do, and then they threaten you if you don't do it, right? So, and then the therapists and the counselors and the domestic violence agencies, they don't know the system. Okay. So, all right. So, so you entered the family court system, you filed for divorce. Okay, we kind of got on a bird walk there, but you filed for divorce. And so let me ask you this. You filed for divorce. Now, after you filed for divorce, did he financially cut you off right away or no?
Yes, so he did. He actually, so at the time it was like in June, and the way that I get paid yearly, at the time I got a lump sum, the month
Were
before.
you working at that point?
Yes, so I was working. I was a teacher,
Okay. You were
and
the lower income earner?
yes, the lower income earner for sure. But so I was a teacher, and we were coming up on the end of the school year, and the district I worked for paid one lump sum. So right before we divorced, we had taken that money that I'd got paid. We'd paid, all of our bills. He went out and spent quite a bit of that. I kind of had nothing left. And then through the summer, of course, we would just live off of what he made. So whenever I filed for the divorce and he left, he refused to pay anything. He didn't pay for the house. Um, he didn't pay utilities. He didn't, want to give money for food. I mean, I'm talking nothing completely cut us off. I mean, I was telling him I needed to get my son's inhaler at one point. That was like $30 copayment to pick up. He refused, he wouldn't do it. Um, he actually, his sister or his brother-in-law actually brought me the money for the inhaler because he was refusing to pay for it. So he didn't give me um, any money. He would tell me I was going to be homeless. Um, he wanted me to lose my home for sure. And then before school started back that summer, he actually sent his mother to my house to pick up my children to take them clothes shopping because she was allowed to have money to take them clothes shopping, but I was not allowed to have money to take them clothes shopping. Um, and I just remember how angry that made me because it was like I had always taken my children clothes shopping, and
Well, it's marital income. It's ridiculous. It's marital income. It's not his income.
then suddenly, his mother, who was never really involved or helped with anything, suddenly is going to show up. And I mean, I couldn't even call her to pick up my kid if I needed her to, like, but suddenly he sends her with money to pick up my children to take them clothes shopping. Um, yeah, so
That's part of the psychological abuse too, like degrading you down to nothing, you know. It's a
exactly.
tactic. Um, okay, so then throughout the litigation process, did you really struggle financially to even afford basic necessities? Whereas, did he struggle financially or did he have an elevation in lifestyle?
So what he did is he went in like, I mean, I don't know, he went and stayed with his mom at the time. And he goes out and he got a new vehicle. He let his get like he didn't like his car he had or something. I don't know.
It seems like every single, that's another pattern I see that it seems like every single perpetrator of domestic abuse who abandons their family financially goes out and gets a brand new vehicle.
Yeah. So it's funny, he went and got a brand new I don't know if it was brand new, but so when we were still married, he goes out and he finances this car that he wanted, right? And he didn't talk to me about it, whatever. I didn't care, is what if he can do what he wants. Well, then after the divorce, he suddenly didn't want that car. He wanted a truck. So he's going to let that car get repoed. And then he goes and finances a truck. Like it was really weird. I don't know why he did that, but he did. But he had plenty of money to do what he needed to do at the time. He wasn't paying any bills. And he told me that too. He said, I don't care where you and the kids live. You're going to be homeless. You're not going to have, a home, whatever. He said, I'm going
Now,
to spend my money on what I want. I'm going to buy some guns. I'm going to do whatever it was he was going to do. And he was very proud of that. Like that's what he was going to do.
yeah, it's what they do. Now, let me ask you this. You had an attorney. So why didn't the attorney get you access back to the marital income?
Because, I mean, they couldn't until I guess the divorce was final. Um, I don't really know how it works from state to state, but the divorce was fine. So I went from the time, so like we split it, like it was the month of June, July, August, September, and then October. October, somewhere, it might have been the last day of October, our divorce was finalized. And when it was finalized
What
is
year was
when
this?
2015. So when it was finalized, then
Oklahoma had Pendente Light in 2015. So that's my question. I don't understand why your attorney didn't file for Pendente Light.
I've never heard that term before, like during the process.
So
I
that's
don't,
Latin for pending litigation. This is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes only, but that is pending litigation support.
yeah. So I have no idea. I wondered that myself. Like I wondered, well, because here's the thing. Okay, so like I really thought we were going to lose our house. Like I thought we were going to be homeless. And then I couldn't buy food or anything. Like my neighbors and a relative came from out of state, brought me a bunch of food, and then I had neighbors bring me dinner, several times, and
Right.
food for my kids. I don't know. I just know we didn't have any money at all. I went back to work in August, and then I got my first paycheck, and that like really helped
But
us.
that's the pattern that I'm trying to highlight here, because in every single interview I do, the individual who is trying to flee the domestic abuse, for some reason, the family court system, and your attorney is a part of the family court system, right? Not filing and prioritizing your financial stability. And it's just saying, oh, well, we'll square it up at the end. That's ridiculous, because that literally decides the entire case, because it gives him such advantage and you such disadvantage. That's the pattern I'm trying to highlight. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I've always wondered, like, kind of about that because, but I honestly, I was never told about it. I didn't know it was a thing at the time. And so I just know,
Exactly my point. You weren't even told about it. Exactly my point. And that is the gap that I see. And that's why I do what I do.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if he would have been ordered to pay right away, like that obviously would have been helpful. Um, but I mean, until our divorce was finalized and then the judge, ordered him to pay, X amount in child support, he did have to pay a couple of years in alimony. Um, yeah, I didn't really
Yeah.
get any.
But
Yeah.
during the case is when you need to still feed kids, clothe kids, and quite frankly, you're entitled to the maintenance of your marital financial status quo. Um, and then also you need to be able to afford litigation. And so because of that, he got litigation advantage. He got an elevation in lifestyle, and then there were cascading consequences because of that, I would imagine. Um, are there any cascading consequences from there that you would be able to share, when it came to, like, long-term financial consequences? No, you're good. Maybe psychological or health consequences, litigation abuse. Like, is there any sort of cascading consequences because the court did not interrupt the financial control?
I mean, so I mean, on the children, yes.
Yeah.
It, yeah, it. So what happened during that time because of kind of what took place or whatever? Hold on just a second. Okay, so during that time, a couple of things that happened is so my daughter at the time, she was really involved in sports, and this breaks my heart. This is one of the things that like this is one of the things that like gets me about the whole thing and like how it impacted the children. But so my oldest son and daughter were really involved in sports, and they were doing well in school and all of those things. The summer of that divorce, they so they actually had to completely drop out of sports. They couldn't play. I couldn't pay. I had no money, and they were in high school, and they had played these sports since they were 3 and 4 years old. And so my daughter was really great softball player in particular. She played competitively. So my kids completely quit sports. They couldn't be a part of any clubs because we couldn't afford it. We didn't have the money. There was no way to even pay. So um, that's the one that sticks out to me. Had we been able to stay financially stable, that could have changed that for them. And both, I will say, both of my oldest kids, the ages they were at the divorce and the consequences from the divorce, they ended up graduating, high school, but they were really rough years for them. It has really impacted them to this day. And I think it was just the age that they were at, and it changed a lot in them at that time. It changed kind of their friends. It changed their, what they were involved in at school. It created a lot of anger in them, I think. And so when I think about the financial, that's what I think about. Um, if we would have had, if they would have intervened and told my ex-husband, you need to start paying right away, then it would have had less of a disruption on their life specifically.
Yeah. And I mean, overall financially though, would you say that he did much better financially um long term because the court didn't interrupt the financial control and you did much worse? I mean, at one point you weren't even able to sustain litigation, right? And luckily you had your, you know, current husband. Um, you know.
Yeah. Can you, yeah. Like years after it happened, I mean, I'm still being drugged through the court system, but no, absolutely. I mean, he was able to not worry about losing a home. He was able to have food. He was able to have all the things that he wanted and needed, and then some. He just, I think he kind of went wild and blew through a lot of money, and he would, he was able to hire his attorneys and not worry about, food or, getting medicine for the kids. Sadly, in my situation, I think everybody's situation is different, but like my priority was always the kids. I was always concerned about the kids. Like, do the kids have what they need? Do they have medical? Do they have food? Do they have, all these things? He did not care. That part did not matter to him. He did not care about that.
Yeah, it's
It
very
didn't
common.
matter. He thought that it would be good for the teenagers to not have food and play sports because they needed to learn life lessons. Like I mean, it just that
Did
was
he say
not
that to you?
um not in those words, but um but in a roundabout way. I mean, those are the types of things he would say. Like, he was really upset with my teenage daughter because she had started kind of getting an attitude because of his abusive behavior. So he had this huge grudge against her. He didn't like her at the time, like, sadly. I mean, I say that softly and I don't want her to ever hear that, even though I think that she knows that she's worked through a lot of things, but that's really impacted her a lot. But it wasn't her, it was just being a strong female that's not going along with everything he says and then standing up to like his abusive behaviors and saying, like, that's not right. Like, in his mind, you're the problem if you do that. And so she became the problem to him.
Yeah, anybody who stands up to him, that's another pattern, is the problem. Yeah, but I mean, long term, I think financially he did much better than you. I think you were harmed financially. I mean, when it came to equitable or equal distribution of the marital assets, I mean, who did better, like you or him? I mean, I mean, not having like him having more than adequate legal representation and you having very limited legal representation. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
would you
Well, yeah,
say?
he definitely has done much better. He did much better because he didn't have to go without and he could do whatever he wanted. And I mean, long term, it impacted me a lot just because I would have, me and the kids would have been so much better. We would have been so much better off had he had never done those things. Absolutely.
And then he was able to use that money to hire an attorney to then take your son, right?
Eventually, yes, because it went on for so long. And that's where, like, my story is a little bit different because after that initial ruling, after the divorce, um, he was ordered to pay some alimony, some child support. He traded 9 years of alimony, or like, a longer time for alimony, to for sole custody for the children at the initial divorce. So I got sole custody. He got to only pay 2 years in alimony. He was happy about that. So of course,
And
I
then
was
he
happy.
used that to then take your son.
Yes, eventually, yes.
Yeah.
So for a couple of years, he did what he was supposed to do. And that was the only time in this entire process that he somewhat did what he was supposed to do in those 2 years. And then after that is when he stopped paying completely. He didn't want to pay child support. He started trying to coerce the kids to turn against me, created all kinds of problems. I mean, he actually sent our oldest son into my home at one point, um, because I had went out with some friends. Um, that I taught with, actually, a group of teachers. We were just going out to, have dinner. And because I was not at the house because I had left, he sent my oldest son so upset into my home to take a baseball bat and bash in my walls at my house. He wanted me to have nothing because I wasn't married to him. And during those 2 years when he was somewhat doing what he was supposed to do, he was kind of sort of like trying to get me to like reconsider. Well, he asked me, like he wanted us to work things out. At that time, I was just so like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Like it's not that I didn't want to have, that dream of a wholesome family. It was, I couldn't do it. There was zero trust.
Right.
And so anyways, he started trying to use the kids from that point, and it became a pattern and a cycle. But it became trying to use the kids so he didn't have to pay child support. He did it with, my oldest daughter. Then he tried with my next daughter. And then with my youngest son, finally, he did it. And then he was able to do this really extreme, crazy stuff with like making up false allegations and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was just an absolute.
And he withheld your son for a year and a half and used him to coerce you into giving up child support and withheld him and even said it in mediation, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's a part of the cascading consequences that I'm trying to highlight for the listeners is, this short-term financial control that results from an individual trying to desperately get out of a relationship where they're being abused, and then the financial control piece happens, and then the court just refusing to stop it and to restore your legal rights. And I don't even want to say like refuse, but like, I mean, just the family court system, like your attorney, for example, is a part of the system. And so them not prioritizing, you know, restoring your rights to your marital income and aggressively, um, it's not something that they just correct later, at the end of the case. It's something that affects the entire case and it causes long-term irreparable harm. It creates severe litigation disadvantage for you, severe litigation advantage for him, and it elevates his lifestyle. And then at the end of it all, it gives him more leverage to then come back and continue to subject you to litigation abuse and you and your children. And then with your situation, he came back and he kept your son from you for a year and a half, right? And so um it's not acceptable to not view this for what it is. It's financial abuse. And my whole thing is if existing matrimonial law was followed, meaning that you were given access back to the marital income and you were given a reasonable and responsible phased financial transition plan so you could bring up your income earning so you didn't have this severe poverty while he doesn't when you're having a divorce. Like it's just it skews the entire outcome. And that's what I'm trying to highlight here. But this is something that needs to be fixed. And I guess until then, well, that's the gap that as an entrepreneur I am filling through my work. And so but yeah, it's just it's really, really sad because it's inconsistent with matrimonial law. It's not supposed to happen, but it's happening every single day. So, anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I think, a lot of people talk about how there's so many issues in family law, and there is, but it's such a complex thing. But in all reality, it could just be that there's just this huge gap. There's this huge gap that's not being filled within the system before you get to the judge in the courtrooms, and then you've got this traumatic situation. It's the reason you're divorcing anyways, and kind of, so often it's, abuse is involved, and then you've got the judge and these like the decrees put into place as far as decisions made. But in between that is where I think a lot of the issues come about. It's really causing the most harm.
You're
to
right.
so
There
many.
is a gap. There's a gap. And I think, we spoke about this earlier. There's a gap where, individuals who are fleeing domestic abuse, um, there is no professional, mainstream at least, right? That is helping to explain the system and educating survivors on the system and helping them come up with their structured financial transition plan, teaching them the system, teaching them how to properly document, and teaching them how to communicate effectively with everybody in the family court system, including their own attorney. And that is the gap. And
Absolutely.
it's not a mainstream solution, but it's what my work seeks to fill. So I think you're right about that. And it's very important because individuals who are leaving domestic abuse in their children deserve much better. They deserve so much less trauma. So,
Right. I agree.
and if it's not filled, there are cascading consequences. And yours is a very extreme example. And I know we didn't get into it much, but um, anyways, yeah, having your child stolen from you for a year and a half in the system, just allowing it is insane. So, anyways, but is there anything else you wanted to share?
No,
That's
that's
pretty much it.
pretty much it for now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode inside of our series called When Coercive Control Turns Financial, the Family Court Response, and the Cascading Consequences. If you are an organization or an event and you are looking for organizational consulting, speaking, or training so you can understand coercive control better, so you can respond better, I want to invite you to go ahead and visit me at crystalfidelli.com. If you are an individual leaving coercive control and you would like support navigating, I want to invite you to go ahead and also visit me at crystalfidelli.com. And if you are interested in specifically supporting You Made a Way, it is the 501c3 nonprofit that I founded and I am the executive director of. If you are just as passionate as we are of making a way for women and children who are leaving coercive control when it turns financial, I want to invite you to go ahead and visit us at youmadeaway.org. And we hope to see you back here next time for another episode of When Coercive Control Turns Financial, the Family Court Response, and the Cascading Consequences. See you then.